Well, thank you very much for having me. So I really enjoy talking about this topic because while I'm kind of a researcher who is lab-based, well, initially that's how I started my research. So we are in the lab and we do all sorts of technology development and we test water and we understand it and we basically design systems and we have students doing all of that stuff. In the last 10 years, 10, 15 years, well, mostly actively in the last 10 years, I have started getting interested in the policy, in how we get our information, our science to be adopted, understood, and used by people. Because at the end of the day, I mean, you're probably aware that at the moment there's lots of conversation about what's the role of everything in the post-COVID world, or we're still in the COVID world, is what is the role of universities? What is the role of research? What is the role of this and that? And, you know, at the end of the day, the role of research and the role of the universities is to come up with useful things to make the world a better place. And I think that's really the driving force. So the boss of all researchers, and I like to remind, I'm in an engineering department, I like to remind my engineers, I say, who's your boss? Your boss is society, is more accountability to the public for all the things that we do. And water and services and whatever is a big, big part of our contribution to. So I really enjoy this space, talking to people. I initially started referring to myself more recently as more of an urban water diplomat. And I'm going to tell you why, because essentially, when it comes to water, we pretty much know everything, pretty much, in terms of the technology, in terms of the techniques, the analysis, the way we can clean water. There has never been a better time than now, because all the technologies are actually becoming cheaper. You know, look at it. We can desalinate water out of the ocean, and it is beautiful and pure. It's one of the best waters, and we have no issues with that. And it's actually, we can do it at a really, really low cost. So desalination in Western Australia is third generation, even fourth generation kind of desalination. It started initially by a bit complex and energy hungry, you know, technology, and it moved into what we do now, which is reverse osmosis. So essentially, it's a big filter that you pressure water through it, and it comes out at the other end very clean. Now, at the moment, what we're doing is we're doing it in a centralized way, in a big place, desalination plant. But when you think about it, desalination plant is like hundreds of cartridges of membrane filters. They look like, essentially, when you look at them, they look like spaghetti. You know the spaghetti that has a hole in the middle? What's the name for that? You know that one? So you pressure the water through it, and it has like tiny little holes, and the clean water will come out of it at the other. That's exactly what it is. So we look at the filter, it's like that. And then inside it, there's hundreds of little membranes, and you pressure the water inside them. Obviously, you need energy to pressure the water, and that's how. So it is not a very complicated system. In fact, you can own one at home if you wanted to. Eventually, that's what it will come down to, is that people will have the ability to clean water in their home to the level that they want. Now, people have yachts and have boats and whatever, they can go out to sea for a long period of time. They can produce their own water. So technology is not the limitation. I say, in general, our solutions to our water problems are probably 10 to 20% technology, 80% people. And that's where your conversation here is extremely important. The decisions that we make about how our water supply is produced, delivered, managed, used, reused, all of those things are conversations that people will have to have. Because in Australia and lots of places in the world, we are actually under stress when it comes to water. Our environment is under stress, and water doesn't come easy in a way. So it is you can't see it because people open the tap and it flows, but it can stop anytime. So when people ask me, is it possible that we'll run out of water overnight? And I say, it is absolutely possible. And I tell you why. Because one of the things that we can have, I mean, we are still in the middle of a pandemic. So imagine if things break and then people who repair those things can't get their parts to be serviced, and then team A is sick and team B is sick, and then you can't have anyone to service the thing. So you have the technology, but you have nobody to look at. So that's one way that you can run out of water. But there are ways that you can run out of water, because then the power would not be available, and then you can run out of water. So we have to think about situations that could happen. And I just direct your attention to something that broke my heart personally, is the bushfires last year and early in the year even. I didn't need really COVID. I knew we had a big problem, because there are towns that were locked down from air, from sea, literally, from land, and you couldn't get to them. You couldn't get to them, and they didn't have water to fight the fires. So that is the worst possible scenario that you can't possibly imagine. A whole town. I don't care whether it's 100 people or 200 or 300. It is a town, and it is in 21st century Australia that you can say that we can run out of water to fight the fires. Not run out of water to drink. You can always get some Pellegrino, which we fly, which we ship from Italy, and we drink. That's fine. That's not really the problem. Someone says, if you run out of water, someone says, I save water, I drink beer. So, drinking is really not the problem. We have enough water for drinking. It becomes to those important things like fighting the fires. And you have like whole towns can run out of water. And that's something that we need really to seriously think about. So we look at it from the city's perspective, but there are lots of issues in regional towns or whatever. So what is, to some extent, our movement, which is called water sensitive cities, but some people call it water wise cities, some people call it integrated water management or whatever, is Natalie gave it a really good description there. It is about getting people in the room and exploring the context for technological solutions to be implemented, by looking at the sociological component, the psychological component, the law elements, everything, local government and all of that. So saying, not every solution fits everywhere. You have to look at the characteristics of the place, and the place will dictate the solution. So we're saying technology is there. So, but the question here is that by 2050, Australia will double in population. So how do we design our cities to cope with the increase in population, but also to have enough services to deliver for everybody? It's not an easy thing to think about, because the way we design, we can think about making, if we double in population, we have the choice of either having 5 Melbournes, 5 Sydneys, or having 10 Perths. So the idea of how big you want your towns to be, and what are the implications for transport and for power, and then water comes in the equation right there. Because in essentially, if you have a high density of population and concentrated in one center, then you have more complicated arrangement to deal with. So we can imagine the future in Western Australia, where you have smaller towns that are connected with like fast rail or whatever, that will have implications on water systems and how we think about a water infrastructure for the future. Because one of the things that is really extremely important when we're thinking about the future and how to service water, we plan water in like lots of 30, 40, 50 years. because we have to put pipes in the ground, we have to plan ahead, we have to understand where we're going to be in 50 years down before we make those decisions. So it's really complicated. At the moment, what we have is we have pipes and pumps and things that were thought of way back, some of it hundreds of years back, and then it's not working necessarily well for us. So we have to adjust them, and we have to dig and replace and all. So we can't keep doing that way. We have to have a level of planning. So we have to talk more to the planners. We have to talk more to the local government. We have to have people involved in coming up with solutions that are not just a single pipe that's going from A to B, because that was the past. And we did some amazing things like the Kalgoorlie, pipeline, which is an amazing engineering project. That is a landmark in engineering, but it is taking water from A to B, and it is just about one purpose. So the future is about making those investments that will basically allow for the city to be livable, for people to have enough water, and for all the other services to be, basically satisfied. I think that's really the conversation. Lots of the time we find that people, and part of this research, we did this thing called water literacy, or assessing how much people know about water. And you'll be surprised that actually people, for various reasons, know very little about water. So in Western Australia, we are one of the best, and we are about only 13% of the people who we surveyed actually had a level of literacy about water that could be equivalent to like year 3, year 4 in primary school when it compares to literacy. And those questions are, this is a water literacy test that basically 40 questions, simple questions, is where does your water come from? Where does it go? And like very, very simple questions. So the people in the street, half of them don't care really. Why? Because they open the tap and there's water. So you wouldn't know. If you're living on a farm, that's a different conversation, because the farming communities know their water. They know where it comes, they know how to deal with it, and they know where it is, and they know its quality. So if you have more than 80% of the people having no clue about where their water comes from, it doesn't start a conversation very well. So one of the things that we did, for example, with the Water Corporation, as a way of getting people to be more aware, is to encourage the Water Corporation and Department of Water to increase the water literacy, to educate people about water, so that people understand that it's not just a resource that you just open the tap and it's going to flow, is that there is a responsibility. You can't keep building and building without really, it's something really important that everyone needs to be part of. The planning for the future, we can't assume that we'll have this desalination, pumping water forever, because that's not the case. Problem here is that desalination, even if we are really advanced in the way we desalinate water, it is still expensive to produce. So we do it at about under $2 a kiloliter, at the source, but to get the water from where it's produced to you, that's the biggest cost. So to give you an example, Kalgoorlie pipeline, 566 kilometers. For 1 kiloliter of water to travel, produced at $2 a kiloliter, it's another $12. So imagine you get online and you're shopping online. This is something I use. So I go and look at an item and it says the item is $20. You're not out of the woods yet. You have to go to the checkout. At the checkout, they go like $59 for shipping. So I say no. Immediately. So this is a case where the cost of shipping the water to your house is getting more and more expensive. And I think that's the issue, is that we say water is actually liquid energy. So, everyone wants water delivered to their home, and everyone wants to live where they want to live. And those are decisions that we make. And as such, we have to answer for those decisions with, understanding it. So impact on planning of cities. Do you make cities grow all the way like along the coast and whatever? That's a big decision because the cost of transporting water becomes then huge. Now, if you have more people, if you have double the people in one location, then the cost is half. If you have 3 times the people, the cost is then divided by 3. So the notion of lifestyle and decisions has huge impact on water. That's just the water going to your house. Now, the ones that nobody talks about is the water leaving your house. And that also is the big expense. You know, you may have heard that there was an issue with toilet paper at some stage. And people started using all sorts of alternatives. And that's when I freaked out. And I was on the media trying to say to people, please don't, because the last thing you want in a pandemic situation is to break the sewer system. And I tell you what, if the sewer system backs up to your house, that is the near-death experience. Lots of people, you know, that is the last thing you want, because houses got totaled, literally, through a blockage of sewer system. And then, you know, there was a YouTube, I saw the lady putting duct tape on the toilet to tape the toilet so that it doesn't flux, because you can't stop it. It's gravity fed, goes one way. If it blocks, it goes up. And then it started coming from everywhere. That is the last thing you want. Yeah, that is a nightmare. And the reason why is that, you know, our, again, infrastructure is designed for certain use, and toilet paper and water and number 1 and number 2 are what's supposed to go down the drain. If you add to it other things, and we did this video where we showed to people that actually you take toilet paper, you put it in water, it dissolves immediately. You take like tissue, it doesn't dissolve, it stays there. Paper towel stays there for weeks on. So if it comes, then it basically clogs in like the T junction of the pipes. That's a problem. And there's nothing you can do. You have to, like, it costs millions of dollars just to do that stuff. So these are the things that we don't see, because one of the biggest tragedies about water is you don't see where the pipes are. You assume that it's going to work, and then everyone will have that service. And I think one of the biggest, you know, I suppose, accomplishment of the developed world is to have clean water and appropriate sanitation. I mean, you can't really imagine the world without a toilet. But there is a large portion of the population of the planet that actually don't even have that luxury. So in a situation where we have already pandemics and issues, then we should think about the infrastructure, not just for now, but for the future. Now, people like their, you know, lifestyle, and they like their one block, especially in Western Australia. They like the living style and all of that. But that will be questioned in the future, in a sense of how can we make sure that the services are actually affordable, in a sense, to be able to afford that luxury. Alternative as well is that eventually people will be off the grid because the technology will allow it, and you know, for power and whatever. At the moment, we have a problem because when people put solar panels on the roofs, the grid can't cope with the production. So, you know, again, because those solutions were kind of add-on. So that's why the policy is really important, is to think about the future as an opportunity for more than one option, and thinking about what we call decentralized systems, all as decentralized all the way to your one house or group of houses, but also thinking about decentralized in a way that it could be connected networks, so that if one part of it fails, then you can actually bypass and create some situations where you can come to save a town, because that town has only one water supply and there's a bushfire and you need to do something about it. So I think the way we look at the future is much more complex. And this idea of water sensitive cities or water wise cities, as it has been adopted by the government. So we give all this science to the government, and sometimes they change the names. We don't care because the end goal is the same. Call it what you want, but the whole point is that you need to start thinking about integration more, and the right hand and the left hand have to be talking to each other so that you know exactly where your investments are going. Local government need to be involved as well, which is really a big place for all the changes and innovation in water or energy or whatever has to have local government involved in it, because lots of the times we have like high level policy at the national level, and then we have state, and then local governments sometimes are left on their own. Because one thing, for example, climate change action is a topic that we can talk about a lot, is that while the conversation is happening at the national level and to some extent at the state level, the responsibility of dealing with the consequences of climate change is left to the local government. And lots of them don't even have a plan of how to deal or assess the risk of flood, for example, or high levels of coastal coastal erosion or whatever. These are things that we see in our community. So you can see the car park in North Fremantle was in the ocean, and then wait for the policy to catch up. You need to do something. So people need to start looking at how to respond to those things that are 100% guaranteed caused by change in the climate. Now, what caused the change of the climate could be debated forever, but the result is that it is affecting that. So you can say, well, the car park shouldn't be there, or the cafe shouldn't be there. That's one question. It's like, lots of people are saying, well, we need to question those decisions that we made by having at the moment, the industry, the insurance industry is ahead of government. They know where their risk is, and they know where the line is. So they go to places and they go like, we can't insure you, and that's a commercial decision. And it happens a lot in East Coast, but it's coming to Western Australia that lots of local government assets will not be insured. If they are not insured, they can't be there. I know it's just like a gazebo and a barbecue, but that's the start, because there's lots of it is pipes and infrastructure, all of that, drains and all of that. So how to think about water as not just the tap, but more about where the areas that is affected by our decisions in water, which is pretty much everything. The way we live, our livability. So that's the pitch that we made to the federal government, is we said, well, if you give us this much money, we're going to get people to think differently about how they use water in cities. And we use water as a way, as an enabler for developing livable cities. And we got lots of really, really good response, especially in Western Australia, where all the agencies were on board. Local government, there's lots of projects that are happening at the moment in pretty much everywhere. We influence the Water Corporation strategic planning. We influence Department of Water strategic planning. We influence Department of, it used to be called housing, but now it's communities. The way we invest in housing, the way we build, all the ideas that environment is part of the equation, that you bring it together. You also connect the drains. There's lots of, if you're aware, there's a number of drains that belong to the Water Corporation. They are supposed to basically keep us dry, but they are fenced off areas that are supposed to be part of the environment. What we did is bringing them together and creating living streams and creating parks and things that will basically make the city respond better to risks and hazards, like, for example, urban heat, which is a big killer. So, our cities are getting hotter and hotter, and you can, by design, you can actually reduce how the city feels if you do it properly. And for that, you need water. You need water, and you need the green infrastructure to be deployed in the right way, designed into So we did this study where you look at the map of the suburbs of Perth, and there's some suburbs in that one day when there's a heat wave, there's one suburb that basically super hot, another suburb next to it that is 10 degrees lower. So you can have up to 10 degrees different from one place to another. I mean, I know a number of you, that's what we do. If on a hot day you decide to walk this way, not that way, there is a reason why. Because there are places that are designed to cope with the heat much better than others. So we put in some places, we put lots of concrete, and that basically causes the heat to be absorbed and to be basically even increased. So that's one of the things that you can do really with this water sensitive city is to achieve that, because you can't just pump air conditioning in the streets. And even air conditioning, there will come a time where it will be too much on the grid, that there are places, there are countries where they limit how low you can go in the temperature, because otherwise you're basically putting too much. So they don't make air conditioning that go too cold, below 24 or something. So here we can go to what, 18, I think, something like that. So you can think about it, like people, like you go sometime to the supermarket and it feels like it's like freezing. So lots of these things are connected, and we used to do what policy in these areas, water separate from electricity, from land, from whatever, and water used to be just about the connection. You just bring the connection and that's, but at the moment there's not enough connections. You have to think about it. You have to have a water plan. If there is a new development, they have to have an idea of how much water they're going to use, how much they're doing in terms of recycling, in terms of, and by the way, recycling had a bad rap for a while, but you know, people now, you know, can see that you can, you know, clean water to highest level of purity. In fact, to a level that you need to add salts to it, because you know, when you make water so clean, it eats the pipes, because you know, water is universal solvent. So you know, water goes to the rock and eats up the rocks, right? So the same thing. So what you do with desalination, you actually clean it to a level that is pure, and you have to add some salt to it to make it travel safely in the pipes. Otherwise, it will eat up all your pipes. If you eat up all your pipes, one of the biggest thing about water is the pipes. The pipes are very, very expensive.
Isn't salt corrosive?
Just enough. Yeah, there's corrosive salt and there's friendly salt. So you wouldn't even taste it. But if you take, you know, it is not advisable to drink super pure water because, you know, but yeah. So, you know, and I think that's one of the those other things that people, you know, they are worried that the cleaning mechanisms or the technology doesn't have enough in it to actually remove everything. Yes, we're going to remove everything. But the problem is that you have to have some water that is useful and usable. So, you know, technology, again, is not a problem. You know, it's about how to implement it and what are the best ways to implement it and what are the uses that will basically limit the costs from rocketing, but also ensuring that people have the right. You know, we are still one of the highest users per capita in the world. You know, now it's unfair because Australia is big and we use it for agriculture and this and that. But still, you know, you go to places like Israel and it's under 100 liter per person. So that's the benchmark, 90, 95 or something. Spain is about 100 and something. We are about 250. The good thing though is that in Perth, we haven't increased the use overall, even if the population increased. So we're doing something. Now, there are things that you can't control. Leakage. Old pipes leak. There's nothing you can do about it. You don't even know. So that's why the Water Corporation is putting lots of effort in leak detection. But there's also leakage in your house that you don't know. And some people, so we were part of a project that was in Kalgoorlie, 14,000 smart meters that were fitted in homes as a trial. It costs about $1 million to get the smart meters. They're not really super smart meters. You know your meter? Yeah, the meter goes like click, click. So they're not electronic, they're like click. So what this French company did is that they put like this little gadget on top, and the gadget is calibrated to hear the click and to count how much water. So you take that data and you transmit it to a node, and the node takes it to a node, and you can almost know how much people use in terms of water almost every 15 minutes. Now that's really interesting and useful, because the data that you get out of it is that people are not in the home and the water is running. There is something wrong. There is a leak. So just from the savings of the leaks in Calgary, that pays for the installation of 14,000 meters, which was $1 million. In 1 year, it's saved, because then the water corporation will go into people and saying, oh, we think there is a leak in your house. So, and then people, that was fixed. Now, this is behind the meter. Now, before the meter, there's always leaks, and, you know, people who go and work in the pipe, sometimes they look and they try to find the pipe is not even there. You know, after 100 years, some of it, you know, was eaten up or whatever, and you have issues of infiltration as well. So infrastructure is old, so most of the time is 100 years. So that's why you will be inconvenienced in lots of places around. I think it's happening at the moment as we speak. You know, this pipes for Perth is something that was a nuisance to lots of businesses, but there's no other way. You have to, because otherwise it's going to blow and there's water that get lost, you know, in a sense. So, you know, and we're renewing that infrastructure slowly. Now, this is just to catch up, to play catch up. But for the future, if we're thinking about doubling the population, we'll have to think about it seriously. So any politician or organization that doesn't have a good plan for water and energy should be asked that question, like how is it going to happen? You know, how do you do that? And if the answer is one thing, I can tell you as an expert, it's not the right answer, because these days what we call the one big engineering solution can only work as much. Say you build one desalination plant. We did it because we were really at the edge. We had to do it, and that's one intervention, and that cost billions of dollars. And we had another one. Now we're re-injecting water in the ground, but these are massive engineering capital solutions or whatever that you can't just have money for all the time. Now we need to think about multiple solutions that are small, large, medium, education, reduce usage, change. Because, you know, the laying upgrade of infrastructure can actually, you know, save money, and you can push it in, you know, technology is getting smaller. So we talked about yachts having, you know, desalination plants is actually the size of a printer, not even a small printer. It's, you know, not even like a size of an old printer, because printers are getting smaller too. What you need is a cartridge that works. Like you can imagine a smart home in the future will have all the technology to actually clean water, to have like water coming from catching the water from the air, you know, using the water from the rain and cleaning it and storing it in your house. Eventually, the government will deliver to you some sort of water at some quality, and then from there you can decide whether you want to buy the Samsung kit or the Mitchell. It will be safe, the water will be safe, but maybe the taste. I mean, the taste is something, is a conversation starter. A bit of an interesting, people think that the water in Perth tastes bad. People in Sydney think the water in Sydney tastes bad. Adelaide or whatever. Yes, the water tastes something. Huh? Yeah, the water tastes something, because it's not supposed not to taste something. What does it taste? It tastes what it's made from, where it comes from. So water goes to the rocks, it goes to the catchment or whatever. So if you don't like it that way, then eventually you will buy your own, you know, Apple system or Samsung system that will clean the water to your satisfaction. It will give you the bubbles, small bubbles, the big bubbles, the water for the tap, the water for whatever you want. And they're, yeah, exactly. But it will be centralized because all the systems now, like smart homes, have like fiber or optic fiber everywhere and communication. And in the same way that you have like a cupboard for communication, lots of buildings there, there will be one at the other end with all the cables or whatever. You will have the one with the water as well. You just, what you do is you buy the filter, you replace it. It will tell you beep beep, and then it will get. It's probably going to be cheaper if you think about it. I mean, it's the same way that you have like solar panels and whatever. You can offset the costs and you can charge your batteries, but that it's very possible for water as well. So many options. That's not necessarily what's going to happen in the future, but people will have that option. This way, if you want to live too far there or too far up there or whatever, you can make your decisions. I mean, it happens in California and lots of places where people have mansions that are absolutely off the grid and they have everything they need if you're affording to pay it. Because eventually, see the costs for everybody of investing in infrastructure that will suit every lifestyle is a really interesting conversation. Because people choose to live where they want to live. You can't say to people, I don't want you to live there, and whatever. And that social conversation about what can we pay for and what can people pay for, and what are you paying for at the moment as well, in comparison to. So it's a really interesting conversation. So I think water isn't really about the technology. Everything is there. And it's really about the ideas that people can come up with that will, help us achieve. And the choices, people, one of the biggest things about water is that, we don't really use essentially 75% of the water that is used globally is for producing food. So in my view, if you look at food and food wastage, if someone says to me, do I take a 4-minute shower? Or what are my options? I said, take an 8-minute shower. I don't care as long as you don't waste food. Because the moment you waste food, 50% of the food that we produce goes to the bin, roughly around the world. Now imagine 75% of the water that we have globally, we use to produce food. That's a big number. So if we stop wasting food, that is a big thing for water. Huge. Numbers are staggering. There's like proportions. And I think choosing also what to eat, just choosing to eat local, choosing to eat in season. All of that adds up in terms of water, because there's this thing called water footprint. So every food that you eat has a signature, has a water signature. So for example, chocolate is 24,000 liters per kilo of chocolate. But I'm not going to stop eating chocolate. Just because chocolate is very special. But you can compare. Beef is actually quite large, so 14,000 liters per kilo. Then pork is cheaper in terms of water. And then you have other things. So there are lots of people who say, I choose to not eat meat or less meat because that's my answer to the environmental issues. So this way we're thinking about water as a much bigger thing. So it's about the things that the way you live, the way you eat, and the way you dress. Because again, a big part of water pollution comes from textile. And textile in the developing world, because think about that t-shirt, especially the red one, apparently because it dyed in red, and the color red doesn't stay well in the textiles. It washes off. That's why you don't put red stuff in the washing machine with everything else. It keeps wearing off, and apparently that's one of the biggest environmental damage as well. So companies like H&M, Swedish clothing companies, are putting lots of money to basically fight the pollution that comes out of producing clothes. Now, how many of you think we have too many clothes? Maybe in June. Do you think you have too many clothes in your wardrobe? Yes? That's right. So you wouldn't think about clothes and water. There is a direct connection to water. So and we just keep accumulating clothes. So having too many clothes, wasting too much food, one of those things that we should. What goes on your plate, and then think about the 4-minute shower. I don't think that's really too much to ask. You know, if you do your food part very well, you can take an extended shower. You deserve it. But you know, the point here is that this notion of water sensitive cities isn't just about one solution fits all, isn't just about the water utility delivering the water and then we don't think about it. It's not about just flushing the toilet and it's going to go somewhere and someone is going to deal with it. In fact, in the survey, there's like 75% of the people that were surveyed didn't know what happens when they flush the toilet and where it goes. So some of them goes, it just goes in the ground. I was like, are you sure? What do you mean in the ground? It must be something. Imagine, you know. So that water literacy and water education is really extremely important. Now, lucky for us, I think our young kids in school, primary school, they're getting that education. So it's coming, starting to, but the people in the city especially, you know, not really sure. They don't get it. They don't know where things are coming from. And I think we need to ignite that conversation about the best use. And what works for Perth doesn't work for Melbourne. What works in Melbourne doesn't work in Sydney. That's how you optimize. What works in Perth doesn't work in Geraldton. Kalgoorlie is different. There's local communities have to be empowered to think about water in their own way and to be supported to coming up with new innovations. Innovation, by the way, is not just about technology. It's about social. It's about those partnerships that people need to push for. Governments, you know, these days, if people are empowered and come up with the right solutions for their local community, I don't know any government who, in their wisdom, will refuse that because you will be doing their work for them. And I think there's lots of solutions. I personally worked with the Water Corporation and various departments. We worked with with you know, country towns, Beverly and Kojinup or whatever. And we were there and we had like conversations with the locals. They knew the answers. They knew the solutions. We just needed to, you know, give them a little bit more technical stuff, support them and whatever. They had the answers. So that's what you want. You want people to, and this town will have an answer and that other town will have a different answer. So this notion of characteristics and local knowledge is extremely important because there's not just one water story, there's multiple water stories and every place has its own water story.